Today, I hope I don't have my sights set too high. I want to talk about Reconstruction. And I hope to tie this up today. If I stay focused, we can get through it. If I stop and tell fun stories about Reagan getting shot, then we won't get, not that that's a fun story, but we won't make it through. So Reconstruction, there are two main parts of this that we need to think about and talk about. One side is political Reconstruction. And by that I mean just how do we go from South Carolina, having participated in electing a governor of another, the president of another country, having fields and the troops fighting against the United States and getting conquered. How do we go from them being that to a state functioning and sending representatives to Congress and participating in presidential elections and all that? How do we reconstruct the country that way? Okay, that actually is the more simple of the two. All right, not that it was perfectly done, but it is much more simple or easy to do. The other side that is much more complicated and tougher to handle is social Reconstruction. Okay, we also, at the same time as we had the political structure blown apart, we had the social structure of the South blown apart. We had a bunch of slaves who were now free, and we had to figure out, how is society going to function in the South? How are the slaves going to be treated? Are we going to let there can be laws keeping them in basic slavery, but not call it slavery? How is society in the South going to be reintegrated? That's not the right word. Reconstructed to function again. It was in complete chaos. So we're going to talk about political Reconstruction, and they are talking about how these states get back into the Union. And then the other side, social Reconstruction, talk about the social upheaval. Really, we go from owners and slaves to, at least in some semblance before the law, equals. No longer owners and slaves, citizens. It's completely changed the whole system in the South. So those two things we need to talk about. Let's do the political side first. How do we get these states back into the country? First thing we need to talk about here is there was a disagreement between Lincoln and Congress about who should control this. Who should be the one, which of these entities, to control these states functioning again as states? Right? Let's see who is familiar with the Constitution. What part of our national government controls new states being added to the Union? Does anybody know that? It's one of those two entities, the president or Congress. So if you're just going to make a wild guess, you got a 50-50 shot at it. And if Stephanie gets it wrong, then you got a really good. Congress does. Congress controls that. Who controls pardons? It's not Congress. The president does, right? And really the heart of the disagreement here was whether or not these states actually left the Union. If they did officially completely leave the Union, then they have to be readmitted, and that goes through Congress. Or if we say, well, they didn't really leave the Union, they were just in rebellion, so they need to be pardoned somehow, then that puts it into control of the president. Okay? I tend to, at least to be consistent with it, I think it more appropriately should be with the president to pardon these states and get them back in. It is funny to see the almost two-faced nature of some of the Republicans. There's a group of Republicans that come in here that are extremely radical, who before the Civil War were saying states can't leave the Union, they don't have that right. And then after the Civil War, they're saying those states left the Union, therefore they have to be readmitted as states. And hopefully you can think, wait a second, I thought you said they couldn't leave before, and now you say they did leave. Really, just like today when politicians make arguments for whatever best helps them politically, all right, the same thing happened back then. So at least I think on that level, the argument of Congress here at least is not consistent. They, before one hand, were saying they couldn't leave. Afterwards, they said they did leave. And it all was so they could control. So we have that disagreement. Lincoln saying that they did not leave. They were in rebellion. They did not officially get out of the Union. They were in rebellion. they need to be pardoned in some fashion and brought back in. And he tries to exercise control over this process under that mantle. And we see Congress here saying they had actually completely left the Union and have to be brought back in as states, just like, I don't know, Indiana or Missouri or some other state had to be brought in out of the blue. All right, so that is the contest we see play out here. Eventually, Congress wins this. Lincoln gets killed, so he's unable to lead the charge for his side very effectively after that point. And Congress wins the day. We'll go through a little bit of the details here. But that is at the heart of why we get these two competing ideas. One side saying they just need to be pardoned. The other side saying, no, they left the Union. They have to be readmitted as states. So, all right, let me first of all here give you the plan that Lincoln initially proposes. He proposes this in 1863. 1863. That's before the war ends. Why would he do it then? Stephanie knows, Joseph?
Just to explain the states that if they surrendered, if they came back, they could have something. You already had something that they could see.
Okay, that is true. To say, you know what, if you're willing to quit fighting, I want to make this easy. Lincoln's plan is referred to as soft peace. It is makes it relatively painless for these states to start functioning as states again. That's true. There's another much less philosophical reason. Well, that maybe is true too, but something even less than that. Some of the states that had initially left were getting conquered and were falling under the control of the Northern Army. So there were places that were kind of in limbo. They weren't part of the South anymore, but they weren't really part of the Union anymore. So he gives this plan here initially to address some of those border states that had gotten conquered by this point and had to be settled. So, all right, Lincoln's plan, 1863, December of 63, the end of the year. He gives that what's happening or what happened in 63. If you're here last semester, this is the big year in the Civil War. Gettysburg and Vicksburg. Those two things were July, basically, of 63. So it's the end of that year he proposes this plan. All right, two things. First of all, he offered amnesty to anybody who had pledged future loyalty to the Union. You didn't have to come in and say, yeah, that Southern thing, that was all stupid. I never wanted to do it, and I never helped them. I've always been loyal to the Union. You didn't have to do that. You just say, from this point on, I'm going to be loyal to the Union. So anybody that did that, they would be given amnesty. There were some exceptions. Some of the military officers at a certain rank, and so some of the leaders, they were not offered this, but for the average Joe person, pledged future loyalty, you'd be given amnesty. Okay? The second part is once 10% of the people had done that, then that state could again start to function as a state. They could begin to form a new state government. They could begin to participate in elections for president. They could send members to Congress. Once 10% had made that pledge, then the state could be brought back in and function as a state. If you're really, really pedantic, and I learned that word in a math book. Anybody know what it means? Overly concerned with details. Pedantic. You might be thinking, how do they figure the 10%? What, is it 10% of all the people? Is it 10% of the adults? So if you want that little tidbit of information that's not going to show up in any test, it was 10% of the people that voted in the last presidential election. If 200,000 people voted in that state in the last presidential election, then 20,000 had to take this pledge. So that 10% of that number is what had to make this pledge, and then the state could begin to function. Now, if you think about that, that is extremely lenient. I mean, there's no desire here to punish them, to kick them in the teeth. We're going to see eventually Congress setting up a military occupation of the South. I mean, it goes completely the other direction with this thing, but very, very lenient. Oh, I thought you had a question. Okay, over the next 6-7 months here, several states, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Tennessee, try to take advantage of this plan. Enough people make this pledge of future loyalty. They begin to form their state governments. They send people to Congress to be their representatives. Right? And at this point, Congress begins to give them some resistance. Congress does have, this is legitimate power of Congress, they are the final arbiter of any elections to Congress. If there's an election in Indiana and it's, for Congress and the state of Indiana can't decide who's going to go there, ultimately Congress has the right to say Joe won, not Sally, or Sally won, not Joe, or we're not going to let either one of them in because they both cheated. Congress has that final say. So here, when these representatives showed up to Congress, Congress said, no, we're not going to let you in. So they were refusing to let them participate fully in the government. At that point, I'm not going to give you the details of their plan, but at that point, Congress passed their own plan that Lincoln vetoes. All right, so Congress sets another plan. It's got more restrictions in it. We're not going to mess with the details of that when we look at the final plan that comes out. But Congress vetoes it. All right, so we have the fight engaged here, Lincoln versus Congress over this. By this point, we're in the middle of 64. Right. 65, we see the war end and Lincoln getting assassinated, so we're not that far from Lincoln being out of the picture. So, okay, so that was my first point here. In 63, Lincoln sets up this soft peace, and in 64, we see Congress stopping that. And a legitimate power of Congress, I'm not trying to disregard that, but that was the tool they used to prevent Lincoln's plan from being put fully into practice. They couldn't go to the state and say, no, you can't have a state government. They couldn't meddle that way, but they could stop the representatives from coming to Congress. All right, second point, at least for my notes. Third point, I have the debate. Then I have Lincoln's soft peace. The next thing to talk about is Johnson. Right. Lincoln gets assassinated and dies on April the 14th, 1865, and this issue is still in the air. It is unsettled. The end of 64, he vetoes the first bill through Congress to set up a Reconstruction plan. He gets killed the next year. April the 14th is when he dies. The vice president that takes over here, Johnson, he tries to continue Lincoln's plan, the same soft peace, this 10% pledging future loyalty to the country.
Was it in 1864 Lincoln dead, or 65?
65 that he died. He tries to continue this plan, and he gets run roughshod over by Congress. He does not have the political stature and clout that Lincoln had. Congress completely rejects his plan. In the 1866 election, we have more radical Republicans. It was a midterm election, so we have a group of radical Republicans getting elected to the House. They're even more steadfast in their desire to punish the South and just drive them into the ground. So he gets completely run roughshod over here, unable to stem the tide. There's one particular thing that we need to mention in this roughshodding of being run over roughshod by Congress, is that Johnson gets impeached in 1868. Does anybody know what it means to be impeached? Okay, he gets accused of wrongdoing. All right, Bill Clinton was impeached but found innocent in the trial. Johnson here is also impeached, but he's found innocent in the trial, if you want to think of a trial analogy. He gets impeached. It was purely a political game. All right, it was part of this struggle. They were trying to neuter his power and ability to stop them. If you want the particular issue, he fired a member of his cabinet. Right? The president gets elected, fills his different positions with people he wants to be there. For them to get their position, Congress has to approve. Right? And here, he fired somebody, and Congress said, oh, he's violating the Constitution. He did not come back to Congress for approval to get rid of a cabinet member, which is really a ridiculous position to take. So it was purely politics that they try to get him thrown out of office. He barely stays in. All right, the Senate, it was a close run thing, but he manages to stay in, is not thrown out of office, but it does effectively silence his opposition. Congress is able to push their plan forward. He vetoes the plan that they put forward, but they just pass it again over top of a veto. So it really silences him here with this impeachment. All right, next thing to talk about, is still with this political reconstruction, is Congress establishing a hard peace. We're going to see them really try to drive the South into the ground. There are several pieces that we need to look at. The first thing I want to look at is the Reconstruction Acts of 1867. These are passed just before the impeachment and all that debacle. Reconstruction Acts of 1867. This law, these acts, are what governed the southern states coming back into the Union and functioning as states. So we'll look at this law, and then there's a couple of things that Congress does here that we need to make note of since we're looking at political reconstruction. So, all right, Reconstruction Acts. All right, first thing, the South was split into 5 military districts and were occupied. Was occupied. The 5 districts were occupied by a military force. Each one had a military governor. He was given a chunk of the Northern Army to occupy the area. So we have an occupation, military occupation of the South, split up into 5 districts. All right, second thing is that the eligible voters in each state could then begin to set up a state constitution. And if you had helped support the South, you were no longer eligible. You know, that pledging future loyalty wasn't an option. Eventually, we do see Congress in 72 offering amnesty, and a lot of these people who had supported the South began to be able to partake again. But at this point, anybody who helped fight with the South or support the South could not partake in this thing. So we had the freed slaves and a minority of the white population here effectively running the show. So the eligible voters could then put together a state constitution and begin to get the system running again, organize elections for Congress, the whole works there. If you want a little tidbit there, Congress had to approve whatever constitution they came up with. So it was Congress here exercising lots and lots of control. All right, then the last piece of the Reconstruction Acts was once, here's another interesting intellectual twist that the radical Republicans here went through. The state legislature had to ratify the 14th Amendment before that state could be admitted to the Union. The 14th Amendment is the one that defined what citizenship was. Anybody born or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction of our country was a citizen. Prior to this, it was completely up to the states. So anyway, that 14th Amendment, that's one of the other laws we need to talk about. The southern states had to ratify that before they were admitted to the Union. Can we think of the irony here? The Congress is saying you're not a state, so you can't be admitted to the Union. But before we admit you to the Union, you've got to ratify an amendment. But they're not a state. It'd be like us going to Mexico and saying, can you ratify an amendment to the U.S. Constitution? They say, wait, we're not a state. We're not part of your government. So on one hand, Congress is saying you're not a state, you can't function as a state, you can't do anything. On the other hand, they're saying ratify this amendment just like you were in a state, like you were a state, and then we'll let you be a state. So anyway, politics has been politics for a very long time. So, all right, so that was the plan.
Did they do that so they couldn't have slaves? So they couldn't reinstate the slavery?
Yeah, that was part of the purpose for that amendment, to not allow states. I'm not trying to argue that the goal behind the amendment was necessarily good, but the contortions that they went through was kind of weird. But he asked what was the purpose of the amendment. Was it defined what a citizen was? It made all the freed slaves citizens. That's what it did. Prior to this, really, it would have been up to the state. The state of Indiana could say, if you're left-handed, you're no longer a citizen of the state of Indiana, and then you would no longer then be a citizen of the country. It was up to, if the state accepted you as a citizen, then you were a citizen of the country. It wouldn't mean that you couldn't go to Illinois and be a citizen there. So, or, people that wear polka-dotted bow ties are going to ban from citizenship or something. So, should we vote on that? Didn't Pastor Damon wear one too? So, wow. He's my boss. At least let me get my check today since it's payday. All right. Reconstruction Acts, 1867. Questions on that? You can see here, not quite as nice as Lincoln's plan. Right? Military occupation, if you help the South, you're not eligible to participate. All right, forcing them to ratify an amendment that wasn't even, that before they were stated. So some goofiness there. Reconstruction Acts, 1867. This is really a product of a group of radical Republicans that come into Congress. Where's the name? Thaddeus Stevens. I have him written down here someplace. Thaddeus Stevens is one of the leaders of this group that came in there just wanting to just drive the South into submission and just punish them. So, all right, let's mention a couple of the things that Congress does here. We have the Reconstruction Acts. That's really the main point of this section. That's the states then are functioning as states again after they go through all of this. The last states come in 1870, if you want them. They had fulfilled all of the requirements, and by 1870 we're back. And 6 came in 68, and 4 more in 70. All right, the other things that Congress does here, the first one is the Freedmen's Bureau. This was vetoed by Johnson again. But it set up a government agency to go in the South and help the freed slaves, help them, set up schools, get jobs, food, all that kind of stuff. No, there was a real need. The freed slaves were in a very, very bad spot. Often, I like to think of it as they were very ignorant and unlearned and unexperienced. It'd be like taking our 5th graders and turning them loose on the world. All right, go get an apartment and a job and support yourself. They're going to look at you with big eyes and say, what do I do? Because they had no experience and were very ignorant. So they were in a bad spot. So anyway, the Freedmen's Bureau aimed at helping, giving them some assistance from the national government. Johnson vetoes it, not because he hates black people. But
it's a Freedmen's
Bureau. Yeah, B-U-R-E-A-U. But really, this constitutionally is not the job of the national level of government. We could have states do it. We could have private charities do it, but really not the job of the national level. So, all right, another thing Congress passes, which we mentioned in the Reconstruction Acts, they passed the 14th Amendment. No, this is just other things Congress did at the same time. So the Freedmen's Bureau is not part of those Reconstruction Acts either. It's separate. Congress passes the 14th Amendment. And what this did, we already kind of talked about it. It stated what a citizen was, which then made all the freed slaves citizens. It also tried to guarantee basic rights for them, to make sure the states didn't trample on their rights. There's future amendments. Wow. They kind of supersede this one, and some of the provisions become pretty pointless in time. But that was a basic goal: prevent the states from stripping rights away from these freed slaves. I said here Congress passed. All they can do is pass the idea. It has to be ratified by the states. So that, when I'm saying Congress passed, they propose the idea. It goes to the states. It gets ratified. It finally becomes an amendment in 1868. That's when it made it through the whole process. For that process to go through, 3/4 of the states have to agree to the amendment. Can anybody think of how they stacked the deck in their favor with the Reconstruction Acts? They had to approve it, right? If you want to be a state, you have to approve it. So you can see here this, they're what's that phrase? They don't play well with others or something. They're abusing their position just a little bit here. All right, so the 14th Amendment is passed. One other one is the 15th Amendment. This comes along in 1870. Same idea, Congress proposes that it has to go for ratification. Congress did make the last 4 states ratify this one as well. So again, they're stacking the deck in their favor. This one also was aimed at the freed slaves, and it limited, if a state didn't let the freed slaves vote and participate in their state government, then it limited their participation in the national government, was the idea. So if the slaves made up 40% of the population and the state didn't let the freed slaves vote in the state, then when it came time for deciding how many representatives in Congress they had, those 40% did not count. So it was that type of situation, limiting the state's participation in the national government if they limited the freed slaves' participation in state government. So that was 1870. Wow, sorry. Any questions about that? We have one more thing to talk about, well, 2 more things to talk about here with this political reconstruction. All right, the next point, at least in my notes, is by 1870, all of the states were back in the Union. And we'll talk a little bit about what happened after that point. There's some really ugly, nasty things that happened here. Very unfortunate things that if Lincoln's plan had been allowed to go through, a lot of this would have been avoided. So, all right, so 1870, have everybody back functioning again. For the first couple of years, we have state governments in the South that are run primarily by the freed slaves. Okay, now again, this might actually be a pleasant thought. Imagine our government run by 5th graders. What 5th grader is going to let a boy in the locker room, in the girls' locker room? They have cooties. I don't go there. So it might not be bad. But really, we had these slaves who had no education, couldn't read for the most part, and it was them and a handful of whites who were running the state government. So we had these governments in the South that were just full of corruption and full of people from the North coming down to take advantage, or Southern whites coming to take advantage. There's a term for each one of those. Does anybody know the term?
Carpetbagger.
Carpetbagger, that was a guy from the North coming to the South, talking about his little carpet bag.
Scallywag.
A scallywag, that was a Southern white person who was taking advantage of the situation. So if we have rampant corruption, people come in and take advantage of these people like you could do to a 5th grader, all right? You take them out and say, hey, I've got this new car for you. It's really sweet. And you could steal money from them, and it'd be ugly. That's what was happening. And then we have just very, very foolish things being done. Right? There are cases of members of state legislatures who were asked how they're going to vote on a certain law that was coming up before them, and they said, I don't know. No one's paid me enough money yet. It's just, whoever pays me the most money, I'm going to vote that way. I don't know yet. We'll see who gives me the most money. So we have that type of situation in the South taking place. That all changes in 1872. 1872, Congress passed the Amnesty Act, which gave amnesty, cleared many of the whites in the South and allowed them to then participate. That was 72. So we have the pendulum swinging the other direction. All right, so we had government run by the freed slaves and a handful of whites, and very poorly run because they didn't know what they were doing, to the whites coming back in charge here, the slave owners and those who had helped fight for the South, them coming in, and they do all that they can to keep the blacks from participating. Right, so we have it going full spectrum. All right, and we have here after 72 the whites, those who had not participated before, taking over, and laws being passed, organizations being formed, the KKK and groups like that, trying to prevent the blacks from showing up to vote or have any say in government. So we have the thing swinging full around here, and now the whites are dominating and preventing the blacks from participating at all. So in 72, the Amnesty Act is kind of the hinge point for when that happens. Let me tell you one story that Booker T. Washington Sorry. It's a very sad story. I'm kidding. One story that Booker T. Washington talks about, this is years later. He was at a construction site, and the guy hauling the bricks up the ladders on the scaffolding, the lowest man, that's the job you don't want. Everybody called him governor. He was a black guy. And eventually said, why do you guys call him governor? And before 72, he had been the governor. But after he leaves office, this is the best job he could get. Now, there's white prejudice and other things involved there, but it gives you a little bit of indication here that they were very uneducated, very ignorant there. So, all right, 72 is kind of the hinge point where we see that shift taking place. All right, one last thing to mention for political Reconstruction. The whole thing is done in 1876. We still have, even in 72, the occupation of the South, federal troops there. That ends in 76. There was a very, very close presidential election, and the agreement was that the northern candidate would win, and the southern candidate would concede, as long as the troops got pulled out of the South. And following that, they pulled the troops out of the South. Hayes is the president that wins. Samuel Tilden's is the Democratic candidate that loses. So anyway, that election there, it was the final end. Now we have the troops out of the South. We have these states fully on their own, functioning as states. So, okay, questions about the political side of Reconstruction? I'm a little bit scared. We're more than halfway through class and we got the easy part done.
What point was Grant elected president?
He was right after Johnson. So it had been president, I have to look at the years. That sounds about right. 69 to 77. So left office, the election was 76, he leaves in 77. Yes, okay. All right, let's talk about the social side of Reconstruction. Now we have the states back functioning again. Now the social side. I'm going to steal my two titles here. If you're wondering if that's a unique occurrence, no, I steal most of this stuff. So I did not live through this stuff, so these aren't first-hand accounts. I've stolen all of it. So I'm going to steal the two titles for this. For the social side of Reconstruction, there are two main thoughts about how this should be approached. Now, what I'm talking about here is the freed slaves and the whites, and how we should get society back functioning again. The whole mess there, how that's going to happen. And primarily, these two ideas focus about how the slaves should operate. What should they do to become a functioning part of society? Before, they had been literally, in lots of people's minds, a piece of furniture, like a horse or a cow, just an animal to be used, not a person. To go from that to being a functioning, contributing person in society. How do we do that? The two ideas are self-hate and pride. All right. Thomas Sowell is the guy I'm stealing this from. He's a black economist, very conservative guy. In one of the books he wrote, he addresses this idea of pride and self-hate. The approach that he endorses, and the one is the right one, is what he calls self-hate. So let's talk about that first, and then we'll talk about the pride one. Hopefully just the term pride makes you think, I don't want that, and maybe he was intending that. Self-hate. Here's his basic definition for what he meant by this. He said that he was talking more than just about the slaves in the South, but for them in particular, they needed to realize that there was a problem with their group, their race, that needed to be fixed before they could advance in society. If you want to be really philosophical, they needed to address the internal problems before they tried to handle the external problems. There were some problems with their particular group, their particular race, that had to be fixed before they made advancements in society. Let me give you a list. This list mostly is from Booker T. Washington's book, him describing this freed slave population. He said they had a very poor work ethic, which on one hand you might think, wow, how could that be? I mean, they were worked all day, but they worked under a whip. Right? I would work hard too if someone was going to beat me with a whip. But once that whip was gone, a lot of them had this mindset of, I worked when I was a slave. I shouldn't have to work now. So very, very lazy in that sense. No thriftiness at all, just foolish and wasteful with their money. Again, think of a fifth grader. Give them $1,000 and say, all right, you need to find a place to live, buy food, clothes, arrange for transportation for the next month. All right. They're going to be at McDonald's right? First. And that money is going to be gone. And in 3 days, they're going to come back and have nothing. All right. And the freed slaves are much that way. They had major family problems. Not all of it of their doing. I mean, the owners would split families up and ship them all over the place. But a family unit, like the Bible describes, was not there. No planning for the future. They never had to. I mean, it was, you get up, you go work in a field or wherever the master says. I mean, there's no thought about the future. No planning for, as we think of as retirement or saving for being sick or anything like that. No, or at the very least poor personal grooming, bathing, brushing your teeth, washing your clothes. Booker T. Washington describes his childhood as they basically lived and ate like animals. They didn't sit at a table and eat. They would find food wherever and just devour it on the spot. So they had major problems, and those needed to be addressed before they could advance in society. Let me give you an example elsewhere that I think maybe will help us think about this. Thomas Sowell, in his book, he uses the example of Scotland as a place that was very backwards, very uneducated, and they eventually get to the point where they produce people like, you might recognize these. How many know the name Adam Smith? If you're here last semester, please smack yourself if you don't know that name. James Watt. You heard of that name? Sir Walter Scott. Which books did he write? I was thinking Ivanhoe. Okay, Ivanhoe. All right. John Stuart Mill, you might know that name. David Hume, another philosopher. Joseph Black, a chemist. All right, they go from being very unlearned and ignorant. In fact, it was said that there was hardly a Scottish baron who could write his own name. That's how illiterate they were. So they start like that in the 1300s. They decide to learn English and adopt the British culture. They've been conquered by them, and they decide to embrace this. There's still some ill will there, but anyway, they learn English, and they get to the point where they are making major contributions to the world. And they start in a very backwards position. So he uses them as another example of people that were in a very bad position. The Scottish barons, they didn't protest and say, you English are unfair to us. No, they educated themselves. They learned to read. They learned to write. They made sure their children learned to read and write. And in time, the British are wanting them. Can you guys come? We want some of you to come down here with us. You guys are smart. We want Adam Smith to teach in our university. All right. So in time, we see the whole thing change. All right. Booker T. Washington. I'm sorry. Let me get back here. Thomas Sowell addresses this idea of self-hate, saying this is the proper approach. The slaves needed to realize that they had these major problems and had to fix them. The Scottish did the same thing. Booker T. Washington, if you want to put a name with the guy who advocates this side, he advocates that basic position. He doesn't use the term self-hate, but he's getting at that idea. All right. He might be familiar with his Tuskegee Institute that he started. And it would have been a very strange institute if you think about, they start off teaching them how to have regular meals and how to bathe every day and brush your teeth and clean it. I mean, that was part of the education. They went on to teach them how to grow crops and how to make bricks and all kinds of other things. But part of it was addressing just these major character flaws. He stressed that they should read the Bible and study the Bible. And so his Tuskegee Institute recognized this. They get to the point, okay, now think, this is in the deep South, late 1800s, prejudice all over the place. They start making bricks. And they really refine it. They make them and test them and change the process and test them. They got to the point where they're making the best bricks in the area. So all of these prejudiced white guys would come and buy the bricks from them. Not because all of a sudden they weren't prejudiced, but there was something here that they wanted. All right? And if you can see the difference, instead of the Booker T. Washington having his guys make some bricks that were kind of poor quality, and then saying, oh, it's racial prejudice, they won't buy our bricks because they don't like black people. He says, no, let's make a better brick. Let's make this thing good. And people came from miles around to buy these bricks because they were extremely good. Right? That's what it means here by the self-hate. We've got to fix our problems. If we go back to the fifth graders going out into society, they go down to McDonald's. They go to the mechanic shop. They want to make bigger money. And they walk in and want a job, and the owner says, no, I'm not going to hire you. Would it make any sense for the fifth grader to go outside and get signs and picket and say, age discrimination, they won't hire me because I'm a kid? That would probably be true as well. But they can't offer anything. They can't fix the car. They wouldn't offer anything of value to that store, to that repair shop. If they come back in 10 years, and they've gone off to diesel mechanic school and they know what they're doing and they come back, that repair shop will be asking them to come back and help. And at that point, then they can say, I'll come and help you, but that shop over there offered me more money. Can you top that? All of a sudden, the whole situation is different. Okay, so just like our fifth graders, if they want to get a decent job and support themselves, we say, well, finish school, get an education. Don't just go out and demand equal status in society. You got to earn it like everybody else. And that's really the position these slaves were in. It wasn't really their fault, but that's the position they were in. Let me give you one more example. This doesn't come from Booker T. Washington. It happens after him. But it's been a movie made about this, which I didn't see the movie, about the story of Jackie Robinson. Anybody know anything about... I'm trying to think if I saw the movie. I don't know. I know I've read about it. Let's go that far at least. Yes! First black player in the major leagues. Okay. He was brought in by the white owners. They went and got him and said, won't you come and play on our team? The fans protested. They threatened to kill Booker T. Washington. Wow. Jackie Robinson. They threatened, boycott the games and told these white owners that they're going to lose everything. And the white owners stuck with it. They wanted him there because he's very good. They were partly wanting to intentionally break this thing. But he was good. And it took a couple years, but all of a sudden, or in a relatively short amount of time, he was loved by his team because he was helping them win. All right? He had earned that position. If you've ever been on a sports team, imagine your coach coming in someday and saying, all right, I know it's the college basketball team. Who's all on the team? We've got several here. All right, Mr. Armacas says, all right, we've got my son Luke. He's in 6th grade, but he's going to be on our team, and you have to accept him. What's that? You're on the team too? Okay. You have to accept him like everybody else. All right. You don't want to claim it? You're ashamed? Should we just come for the food tonight? We could save our $1 admissions and go to the snack shop. But anyway, they're in that situation. You guys are going to hate Luke. You might already hate him anyway, but you're going to hate Luke because the coach is forcing him onto the team. He can't play. He can't dribble. He can't even keep his clothes together in his own bag because he's in elementary school. He's a complete disaster. But here, if the government, the coach, says you have to accept him onto the team, that's just going to create strife. All right, you're going to hate him. Okay, and really, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. What we eventually did in time was the government says you have to accept them on equal footing. You have to accept the freed slaves on equal footing. It doesn't matter if they can contribute or anything. You have to accept them. And that generates strife. Okay, I'm not here saying that prejudice and other things are correct or right, but the government coming and forcing that creates strife. So we're getting ahead of myself a little bit. That is the self-hate. Does that make sense? That philosophy was followed by a lot of the freed slaves. Booker T. Washington and others pushed it. He wasn't the only one. And we see a lot of improvement there. Eventually, though, another philosophy comes along called pride, which is the wrong idea. Let me give you the basic definition from Soul. Problems in society need to be fixed before you can advance. Be like me going to Purdue and demanding to be admitted to the foreign languages department. And when they say you can't speak a foreign language, me going out and saying that's unfair. They're discriminated against non-foreign language speakers and demanding, I want to be hired by the foreign language department. And if I want to get hired by the foreign language department, what would be maybe a logical thing for me to do? Yeah, learn a foreign language. Become good at a foreign language, and maybe then they'll come ask me to work there. They'll want me there rather than me have the government force them to accept me. All right, so here, completely the opposite. Instead of me fix my problems, I need society, and we should think we need the government to force society to change to accept me. I don't have to fix anything. They should be forced to accept me, and by they being forced, it would be the government forcing them. The man to associate with this would be W.E.B. Dubois. He helped push for this around the turn of the century. What did he say? Yeah, W.E.B. Dubois. Yep. E.B. W.E.B. D-U-B-O-I-S. He pushes this idea. And unfortunately, a lot of the black society has followed this. I'm not saying everybody. I have some very, very good black friends, but that's a lot of black society has followed this. There was major improvement up until this point, and we begin to see a step backwards. They began to demand acceptance, go to the government and expect the government to force other people to accept them. And that generates strife. It doesn't fix the problem. Anyway, major problems. Dubois, if you want to know other things about him, in 1909 he helped form the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. He was not the only founder, but he helped with the founding. Later in life, he became a communist and renounced his American citizenship and moved to Ghana. All right, that gives a little bit of an indication of his mindset, at least. All right, so pride and self-hate. Those are the two approaches here with the social side of Reconstruction. The self-hate, that's the appropriate place. I mean, that is, some of you who wants to be a Christian school teacher? Who's in school for that? Okay. You get out of high school and you go apply to Christian school, they're going to say, no, you don't know anything. Go to college, you get a degree, prove that you can, that you understand the material, then apply at the Christian school. Much readily will they accept you. It'd be stupid for Morgan. I almost called you Beth Lee again. Whatever, whichever hall we have. To say, oh, they just don't like people with straight hair. That's why they didn't hire me. Maybe some of the other girls should apply. That would be stupid, all right? But often that's what happens. Somebody doesn't get hired and they say, oh, it's because I'm black, or because I'm a girl, or because I'm left-handed, or because now I'm gay, or even worse than that, I'm a guy who thinks he's a girl, and that's why I will not hire somebody that thinks he's a girl that really is a guy. That's true. That would be the reason. But anyway, we too often, still to this day, we jump to accusing everybody else of having a problem, and that's why they want to hire me, instead of, well, maybe I should learn a foreign language, or maybe I should, when I go to get interviewed for the job, bathe, shave, put on clean clothes. I've talked to people who say, oh, no, I don't need to do that. They shouldn't judge the exterior. You want to work at a fast food place, and you really think they want you to serve people? Right, but they'll say, "Oh no, they didn't hire me because of this or that." No, it's because you stink and you have dirty clothes on. So anyway, we should look at ourselves and fix our own problems. And if you're ever wondering, At what point do we get all of our own problems fixed? That's heaven. So I mean, we're not going to get to some point where we can then stand up on our hobby horse and say, all right, guys, I got it figured out. All you stupid people get it. No, that's never going to happen. We can always find things in ourselves that we need to get right. So, all right, questions? We're early. I'm sorry. You're paying for all of this lecture. Yeah.
Do you think if Lincoln would have lived longer, we wouldn't have as many problems?
Oh, wow. That's a very big question. Potentially, but who knows? I do think at least the political side of Reconstruction would have been different. Who knows? Who knows? So the Dubois side of all of that really doesn't come on to about 1900, so it was long after that situation. So, but who knows? So, all right, you're dismissed.